I have your personal. Okay, good, because it has like nothing.
If you want to, if you guys want to get some shots here, maybe if you stand in front of the posters, right? Oh, perfect spot.
It's kind of like the red carpet, but not really. It's like red carpet. Should be lined in water.
Who are you wearing? Cardi B or Nicki Minaj?
Wait, I'm just gonna.
Mona, can we get you down here, please?
So if you'd like to walk up over, we got you're not interviewing, right? Just getting footage, just footage.
All right, good. Yeah, let me back up some. I don't want to post it.
So, we are recording. Dr. Tell us a little bit about what's your anticipation for this film? Did you have a hand in making it? Were you interviewed? What's going on?
I was interviewed for the film, so Michael Moore came out a few months ago. We sat down in my office, spent about 3 hours together, talking about everything, talking about Flint, talking about what happened, and talking about water, but talking about the deeper roots of our crisis and what caused this crisis, the democracy issues, the austerity issues, the discrimination issues. So really a whole range of topics. I have not seen the movie. I'm looking forward to seeing the movie, and I'm looking forward to speaking to Michael about his reaction, my reaction, the crowd's reaction, and really what this means for us.
And we all probably watched the trailer. We saw a comical side where he poured some water, Flint water, on Governor Snyder's lawn. What did you think of that?
I think it's classic Michael Moore. He's a filmmaker. That's what people want to see, and that's what brings audiences. And I think that's great because if you dwell so much on the negative and the despair and the hopelessness, you can lose what's really going on when you feel that confidence.
What do you think is going to change people's views of this film? I know you haven't seen it, but what are you hoping for out of this film?
I hope so. So, my message that I've been preaching is that, in the midst of all these issues, and Flint is just an isolated story of so much of what's happening in our nation. We are in a crisis, largely of a democracy crisis, with voter disenfranchisement, gerrymandering, voter suppression. In Flint, we lost democracy with emergency government. There's environmental issues all over. There's austerity issues all over. But by and large, our nation is in a crisis of how we take care of each other. And that played out in Flint. So I hope that this movie raises those issues nationally. And I hope it re-inspires folks to take action, to open their eyes, and take care of each other.
Now, obviously, we know it's going to be highlighted in the film.
We've had for Southwest Detroit.
What do you think? Is this going to be another film out there, or is it just going to be drummed out by all those other films? Do you think it's going to bring more attention?
Absolutely. So we live in such a fast-paced media cycle. There's so many amazing stories happening right now, but we need to be reminded of what's happening in Flint. When I started writing my book 2 years ago, I knew that the nation's attention would fade, that they would move on to other stories, and I wanted a way to bring that flashlight, that spotlight back on Flint because it's a story that needs telling, and it's a long-term story.
And can you tell us a little bit about what might be in the film?
I have no idea.
Perfect.
Looking forward to seeing it.
Do you think that there's a lot of residents here tonight and a little co-working space with On Time magazine, out these things, like
in the middle of the worst comes to worst, water in the world, just I can see a predominantly
not in Flint, what is it that you want people on a nationwide basis to know about Flint? And not just a news topic, but like actually do something actions.
Yeah, I want people to know that Flint does not equal disaster and crisis. Flint will be defined by our recovery, by what we are doing right now and moving forward. Flint is a model of hope. We are doing things right now in the city, especially for our children, that aren't being done anywhere else. And in the darkest places, the darkest hours, we can be here. And that is the message that I hope this movie comes across with. But very much my message is that no matter the despair and the darkness you find yourself in, you can open your eyes, you can take action, and you can fight for what's right, especially for our most vulnerable populations.
Who's to blame for what had happened?
You should read my book. So there are many, what the eyes don't see. So, you know, it's very much about Flint, but it's about people and places and problems all over this country that we choose not to see. And it's about our ability and the necessity for all of us to open our eyes to these problems, be it in Flint or be it all over this nation. There are many villains in this story, just like there's many villains in where we are right now in this nation, this crisis that we're in, this nation. And those are deeper villains. They're not people's names, but they're the villains of lost opportunity and racism and lost democracy and austerity. Those are the real villains that we have to tackle.
I'm not a huge fan of Michael Moore's, but people sometimes say he's preaching to the choir with his films. What can you tell people that aren't fans of Michael Moore's, that aren't maybe apt to go see a Michael Moore film, to get this message out to those people who really see to?
I don't know. You know, his films are brilliant. His films share important messages from gun violence to how we take care of each other. I think this is another film at a very important time in our nation. We are really at a crossroads of where we want to go next. So I think this movie, which I haven't seen yet, hopefully will share the lessons of how we can take action and how we can change that trajectory of where we're going.
Do you feel there still needs to be federal action taken, and how do you think the current administration, you know, has acted or not acted, you know?
In Flint? Absolutely. So we are just the beginning of our recovery. We need long-term investment for all of our resources. We need the continuation, for example, of Medicaid expansion and home visiting programs and child care services and Head Start. So this federal investments that need to continue, that need to be more thoroughly invested in. Also statewide investments and philanthropic investments. The story of Flint is not something that is going to be resolved in 1 or 2 years. It is something that needs long-term commitment, especially for our children, when you consider the trauma of this crisis and its potential consequences.
Do you see that commitment coming from the current administration, or
No, I don't. I don't see it. And you know what's really been set up in the current administration is many more Flints to come. We see almost a permanent dismantling of the EPA. Regulations that protect our air and water quality, the safeguards for our safety net populations threatened to be dismantled, access to health care and the ACA, all of these are critical needs and necessities for our most vulnerable populations. And when we dismantle them, we only risk many, many more Flints to come. The laws on the books to date do not protect future communities from having similar water issues, and those need to be strengthened and catch up with the science, but we're very much in this climate of disrespect for science.
What do you think, now that we have a little bit of a spotlight back, needs to happen right now? You had a list there that needs to be done. There's quite a lot of work that needs to be done, but what's maybe number one and number two?
I think what needs to happen is a recommitment to some of the resources that initially came in. For example, the state committed to early childhood slots, preschool slots. That funding has expired. Yet some of the youngest kids who are impacted by this crisis aren't eligible for those resources. So we need a recommitment at the state level and the federal level for the evidence-based, science-based interventions that we know will protect the children of Flint, and those are not guaranteed.
Anything else you want to say to President Trump?
I met him several years ago before he was president at the Time 100 event. I invited him to Flint. He actually came to Flint. I think he needs to come back to Flint. I think he needs to see a city that is in the midst of an ongoing crisis that needs long-term investment.
Dr. Hanna, can you tell me about your book, What the Eyes Don't See? What themes you explore and why it made sense to partner with Michael Moore on this event? What are the parallel themes?
Sure. So my book, What the Eyes Don't See, was released a couple months ago. It is a book that very much in a fast-paced first-hand account goes through what happened in Flint and my role in helping to uncover the crisis. It's also a memoir. It's an immigrant story. It talks about how I came to this country when I was 4 and was really embraced and had the opportunity for that American dream. Yet the kids that I take care of every day in Flint, they often wake up to a nightmare where they are not afforded those same opportunities of freedom and democracy.
Thank you. Why do you think it's important to screen this film, for the U.S. premiere of this film to be here in Flint?
Because Flint is a part of the movie. I'm not sure how big of a part of the movie, but this is where Michael Moore is from. Michael Moore is from. This is where he made his name with Roger and me over 25 years ago. Flint is a part of almost every one of his movies. He comes back to Flint, and I think it's important to put that spotlight back on Flint. And this crisis, our water crisis, was built on decades of crisis, which Michael Moore has really brought to light in the past. A crisis of disinvestment, globalization, unemployment, poverty, racism. Those are issues that has been suffering from, like many Rust Belt cities.
Can I ask, with the news coming out of Detroit about the problem with lead in schools, can you talk to the people of Detroit and people everywhere that how this problem is going to continue in time?
Yeah, so one of the positive ripple effects of Flint is that we brought the issue of lead and water to light. Lead and water is not just a Flint issue. It is everywhere. The rules on the book do not limit the amount of exposure to lead in water. The lead and copper rule is very weak. We are hearing almost week after week a school, a city that is testing and finding lead in the water. There are no rules, there are no regulations that look at lead in water in schools or child care facilities. It is grossly inadequate. So it is no surprise that Detroit found lead in their schools, just like cities and schools all over the place. Baltimore has not used their school fountains for over a decade before Flint, because whenever they turn on, they test, they find lead, and they close it. So we need a national investment in the infrastructure of schools, but we need a strengthening of regulations that protect our most vulnerable children.
Thank you.
You became sort of an accidental activist. What lessons have you learned for those who want to leverage their resources, their experience, their skills to making a difference?
I think that's the message of my book, and I think that's the message of this movie, that we are all powerful people. We all have the ability to open our eyes, to not accept the status quo, and to be active and to fight for a better tomorrow. So that's the situation I found myself in, but that's a situation that we're finding all over. It's a story of activism, it's a story of resistance. People are saying, hey, we've had enough. We want to make a difference in the lives of our families and our communities. And anybody can do this. You do not need to be a doctor. It's anyone, anywhere, no matter how long you've been in this country or not, we all have the power within us to make the world a better place.
Well, it helps to be as smart as you.
We're all of us. It's all on our team.
Hi, Dr. Mona, Pat, and AJ.
Hey, how's it going?
How are you?
Great.
Hey, we're just curious, for kids in the Flint school system, if they only have a choice of the water fountain or Mountain Dew, what would you recommend? You're a doctor. You have to answer that.
Yeah.
Flint water in a safe zone, but out of the water fountain, or Mountain Dew. What do you give a second grader?
So the Flint Community Schools has filtered filtered water stations.
Okay.
So I would recommend that they use one of those filtered stations.
So you're trusting the filters?
I am trusting the filters.
Right.
The filters have been tested. They continue to be tested. They need to be tested again and again and again. But Mountain Dew is not good for kids.
Okay, so Mountain Dew bad.
Mountain Dew bad.
Flint water bad. Filters, all right.
Filters everywhere. So like we said, this is not a Flint issue. We see what's going on in Detroit. This is all over the nation issue. There is lead in water, especially in schools, because of schools don't use their water a lot.
Do we know about it? Where it's at?
I personally have not investigated. I know there's people looking at it, but there's bacteria in all filters all the time, but it's the question of whether or not they're pathogenic. Do they cause harm? And by and large, there has been no evidence that those bacteria have caused harm that are in these filters, but that is not what it is.
How do we stem the fears in this community?
It's trust building, it's rapport building, it's relationship building. It's a long road to come. I I was at a meeting recently of philosophers, and the question came up of trust. And I'm like, yeah, we're working on rebuilding trust. It's going to take a long time. And one person's like, well, don't you want to have mistrust? Don't you want to have people who keep asking, is this safe? Is this okay? And I think that's important too. We want people to ask questions. We want people to make sure that they're just not drinking the Kool-Aid.
Thank you.
You bet.